This is Christopher Ducharme, whose struggle as a victim of homicide evolved in Western Canada. In the mid-90s, he was one of 3 kids living at the time with their divorced mother in Campbell River, BC.
15 years ago, I was 14 years old, and I was just heading back to Alberta to visit my father for spring break, and it was supposed to be a week of romance between my mom and her common-law boyfriend, and ended in a tragedy. And it was a very, obviously a traumatic experience. When the news came on the telephone is how it came, and my brother came out of the bedroom and he gave this news to us, and almost immediately we knew, even before he said what happened, we knew she was gone. But at that moment we all huddled. It was probably the first healing process, that the very long journey.
But for Chris and his siblings, the difficult process of dealing with this murder was just beginning.
When I returned back to the school that I was attending, all of my high school friends basically couldn't relate, and they didn't know how to relate, and basically I lost those friendships because they didn't know how to talk to me. So there was a lot of dark moments. The first couple years was a lot of emptiness and grieving and depression. I had some suicidal thoughts. Never fortunately acted on them, but you get tempted, especially at that age in your adolescent years, to get into the substance abuse and that sort of thing. So
healing was a tough process, especially in his teen years. But Chris, like some other victims, discovered a creative outlet which became very powerful.
I think expression as a very basic principle is very important for healing, and for me specifically, poetry became that. That was my first form of art that I developed, and it was about a year, 9 months from the day my mom was murdered to the day I wrote my first poem. And some of it's really, really dark and heavy stuff, and I actually had no shame in sharing it. And to be honest, this book is, this here is my poetry book. So it's the first book I wrote, so when I read through it, I can actually see the changes that took place in my life.
But Chris's poetry was very internal, and he gradually began sharing his story with others.
Part of my moving forward in my grief was talking about it and telling people. And I told many, many people my story. Thousands I've told personally, not to mention through media and that. But for me, I was comfortable with that, and that's what I needed to do. And that's the thing, every victim or every person has a different way of coping, different way of managing their stress, and different way of interacting.
By 2005, 10 years after the homicide, Chris was living in Alberta and beginning another stage of his move forward.
At that point, I actually came across the Victims of Homicide Support Society of Edmonton. And that was a support group that was available to all public, anybody who's been offended or afflicted by homicide. When I attended that group, I started realizing it wasn't just about sharing the story that was so powerful, but what even more so is that you were sharing with people who truly understood. So when I moved from Edmonton to Vancouver, I said, I want to start up the Victims of Homicide project there.
Within a couple of years of arriving in Vancouver, Chris was able to use his own experience to create a new dedicated organization called the BC Victims of Homicide.
The BC Victims of Homicide is targeting support for victims of homicide, so people who've been affected in one way or another. Typically it's family, friends, and acquaintances who've known someone who's died from homicide.
For Chris, both personally and in his work with other victims of homicide, it's been a long journey that's not over yet.
Moving forward for me, now that I've done a lot of the work on myself, I've been through the depths of my own, despair and difficulty in situations. But right now at this point, I'm at a place where I can be healthy in my life, and I'm thankful that I can actually take a little bit of a step back and see the big picture of what we're trying to do here. this whole involvement for me has allowed me to look outside of myself, and that's a healing process.